Karabo Mokoape is the CEO of OOBA Group. He has a background as a journalist and a foreign correspondent for various media outlets, including the SABC. He has covered conflicts in Somalia, Gaza, Afghanistan, and the Ivory Coast. Karabo has traveled to more than 70 countries and speaks a number of foreign languages. Is Afrikaans one of those? I'm just checking. Including French and Spanish. Karabo has a BA degree in global studies. He serves on the boards of several organizations, including Mr. Wakefield Hilton College. Put your hands together, everybody, and welcome Karabo Mokoape.
It's so good to be here this afternoon, to be with all of you. I must say, when I walked in here, I really felt as though I just walked into a party, a Christmas party in February, and I was confused. Well, you guys do know how to throw a party, it seems, in this industry. It's a great honor, it's a great pleasure, always for me to be invited to spend time with people. Really, you're inviting me into your lives, you're inviting me to share something of my heart, and you're trusting that I won't waste your time, and I hope not to. I want to begin by thanking again Linda for organizing all of this, for reaching out to me to come and spend this time with you. I also want to commend all of you who are here today, because as Justin says, you are improving the present moment. Just by your very presence here today, you have demonstrated where your hearts are, you have demonstrated the goodwill that you have for the community in which you live. I honor you for that. I want to begin by telling you that I am a businessman. That is to say, I wake up every day concerned with how I'm going to deliver better services, hold on to my clients, meet payroll, and remain in good standing with the taxman. I understand budget deficits, being short paid, and the many other risks that threaten any business on a daily basis. I also understand what it feels like when your best efforts just aren't enough, and your business fails, and you have to liquidate. This is the life of the business person, and this is my life. At Catalyx Consulting, we are social development consultants and concern ourselves with designing social programs for corporates in the state. At OOBA Solutions, we design software as a service products for various industries. In my spare time, I do what I'm doing today. And beyond this, I sit on a number of corporate boards and civil society boards where I do my best to give effective strategic advice to organizations of various sizes. Why am I laboring this point, you might ask, and you would be right to ask. It's because over the next few minutes, I am going to take you on a journey through some scary and seemingly fantastical terrain. You will find yourself wanting not to believe what I'm telling you. You will find yourself wanting to dismiss me as some leftist kook with wishful thinking and no understanding of how the real world of business works. When you feel this urge to think this thought, please resist it and keep listening. I want to make the case to you today that growing income inequality is the single greatest threat to global peace and security in our generation. That it is the great civil rights injustice in the world today, where the majority are asked to do with less less and less, while the privileged few devour the resources that were meant for everyone to share. I will make the case to you today that a system that perpetuates this dynamic is the apartheid of our times. I will make the case that this cannot stand, that it is socially, economically, politically unsustainable. And then I will demonstrate to you that there is a better way. And that it is in it is in your, it is in our best interests to do things differently whilst we still have the time. I want to assure you that it is not my intention to scare you today. Nor is it my intention to make you feel guilty. Because you're here, and you are showing your heart, and you are showing your intent. But rather it is my intention to tell you the difficult truth about where we are, and to empower you to know that we really do have the opportunity to make different decisions. I spent a number of years in my life working as a conflict journalist. During those years, I traveled to a number of the world's most dangerous and volatile locales. In the Ivory Coast Civil War that raged from 2002 to 2008 and still smolders to this day, the Muslim minority in the north revolted against the Christian majority in the south. In the war that followed, thousands of civilians were killed and millions displaced as the country was split in two. In Somalia, the warring clans fought and still fight street by street for the right to control key urban districts, access to arable land, and the shipping lane that is the Gulf of Aden. I must tell you, Somalia is by far the single most lawless place you will ever see. Worse than Afghanistan, worse than Haiti, worse than any place you can imagine. It's every man for himself, and incidentally, it has the highest per capita number of guns in the world as well. In 2007, I spent a period of time in Afghanistan. On the morning of November 28th, I was awoken by what felt like an earthquake. Through the haze of my suddenly broken sleep, I heard windows shattering all around me and the deathly screams of men, women, and children. Instinctively, I shouted to my grizzled war photographer friend in the next room, "Jason, is that a bomb?" To which he responded, "Yeah, mate." And I said, "Well, let's go." And within a minute, we were leaping out of the building and into the street below. And as we did so, we were greeted by the massive flames. As we sprinted towards the scene of the bombing, hundreds of people were already running in the opposite direction. Many of them were bloodied and bruised, while others closer to the epicenter had already perished. That day, a Taliban insurgent had fired a rocket-propelled grenade, or RPG, from a nearby hilltop into the vehicle convoy carrying the Minister of Defense across from our hotel. The convoy was hit and a number of senior officials died, including many, many innocent civilians. In 2009, February, I remember being on the Rafah border between Egypt and Gaza during another flare-up of the Israeli-Palestinian war. Though it wasn't so much a war as it was an overwhelming aerial bombing campaign of the tiny enclave by the Israeli Air Force. 1,400 people perished, all Palestinian. On the border that day, thousands of Palestinian refugees were desperately trying to escape the carnage and seeking refuge in Egypt. I could see them lined up on the other side of the fence, and their numbers stretching as far as the eye could see. I, on the other hand, was fighting equally hard to get in, and I did. Between between 2007 and 2009, I was a resident of Cairo, Egypt. That ancient city, once the greatest city in the world. Despite years of oppression under the yoke of the dictator Hosni Mubarak, Egyptians were famous in the Arab world for their docility. This meant that for 30 years, Egypt was the most stable country in the region, and therefore hugely attractive to tourists and investors alike. Therefore, no one, and I mean no one, could have seen what would happen next. The Egyptian revolution that shook the world. And I'm led to ask, what was the common denominator between all of these varied conflicts and troubles? Simply, it was desperation. The kind of desperation that makes people feel as though they've run out of options. The kind of desperation that allows men to abandon reason and succumb to instinct. Specifically, the instinct to survive. And the kind of desperation that is most likely to occur when people lose faith in the fairness of the social order in which they live. Fairness, it turns out, is a big deal to humans. There's a famous experiment where two individuals are selected to participate at random. The first participant is told that he has won a huge sum of money, let's say R1 million. However, in order to collect his winnings, he must share his winnings with a second participant at his own discretion. In other words, he could choose to give the other person 1% of the winnings and keep the 99% for himself. However, here's the catch. In this scenario, if the second person refuses the offer made by the winner, then both people walk away with nothing. Now, most people who play this game end up giving the second person close to 50% of the winnings. This is because the winners would rather have half of something than all of nothing. Now, the question is, why would the second participant ever refuse any offer that was made? Considering that he didn't work any harder for the money than the winner did. Well, the answer is it just feels unfair for the winner to take everything. And statistically, if the winner offers less than 20%, the second recipient will refuse. He would rather have 0 than have 20%. And this is the psychology that can drive violent revolt, where massive income inequality exists. People eventually conclude that they would rather blow the whole thing up than countenance the gross unfairness of it all. I think we can all identify with this kind of reflexive thinking. This is essentially what my wife and I fight about every time we quarrel about the dishes. You see, we're saying this: I could do the dishes, but I refuse because it's not my turn. And I'd rather they sat there smelling and stinking it up for both of us than give in. It's just not fair. My little boy is 7 years old, and he's recently discovered the concept of fairness. And now it's just not fair, Dad. It's just not fair has become his response to just about anything I ask him to do. Fairness, it turns out, is a big deal. So, how about the new Pope? I love the new Pope. In fact, everyone loves the new Pope. So much so that he was voted Time Magazine's Person of the Year for 2013, beating out the NSA leaker, Edward Snowden, and Miley Cyrus, and Justin Bieber. In fact, he is the rock and roll star Pope. And everywhere he goes, he is greeted by throngs of adoring fans. Now you might say, doesn't every Pope get this treatment? Well, the answer in a word is no. In fact, it seems hardly fair to compare him to the dour Pope Benedict, whom he succeeded. In fact, not even the late John Paul II enjoyed quite this degree of fascination and excitement. And I say, why not? Instead of traveling in the bulletproof Pope Mobile, he prefers to drive around in a beat-up 1984 Renault. Instead of living in the papal mansion, he has taken up residence in one of the modest apartments. He is known from time to time to sneak out of the Vatican and spend time on the streets with the homeless. He even takes selfies with teenage girls. What's not to love about the new Pope? For Valentine's Day Mass, he gave a message essentially entitled, "Put a ring on it." This is the 21st century Pope that we have been waiting for. And he is so much more fun than we could ever have imagined. In fact, he's the happy-go-lucky grandpa we all wish we had. But there's much more to this Pope. And his greatest contribution has been to the discussion around global income inequality, to which he has added his considerable voice. In so doing, he has placed this matter firmly on the public agenda, forcing every government and every business leader to reckon with it. Among the things Pope Francis has said was this: some people continue to defend trickle-down theories which assume that economic growth encouraged by a free market will inevitably succeed in bringing about greater justice and inclusivity in the world. This opinion, which has never been tested by the facts, expresses a crude and naive trust in the goodness of those wielding economic power and in the sacralized workings of the prevailing economic system. Pretty harsh words. And if that wasn't enough to shock the system, he followed it up with this: just as the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," sets a clear limit in order to safeguard the value of human life, today we also have to say, "Thou shalt not," to an economy of exclusion and inequality. Such an economy kills. How can it be that it is not news when an elderly homeless person dies of exposure, but it is news when the stock market loses 2 points? That's our Pope. What he's essentially saying is what many others, and including myself, have been saying for years: that we cannot continue to support an economic system that rewards power over effort and greed over need. That such a system is certainly not godly, and that it cannot stand. Like never before, my friends, we are living through transformative times. We are seeing the world reshaped in ways before our very eyes that would have seemed unthinkable a few years ago. People everywhere are increasingly coming to the conclusion that their political leaders have colluded with business and systematically stacked the deck against them. These, my friends, are different times. So just how unequal is this world that we live in? Well, the figures are quite startling. Let's consider that at the recent Davos summit, it was announced rather inconveniently, I would think, that 85 people have the same wealth as 3.5 billion of the poorest people in the world. Digest that for a moment. The richest 85 people in the world have more wealth than the poorest 3.5 billion. Billion with a B in the world. Almost half the world's wealth is controlled by 1% of the population. The levels of income inequality have exploded to previously unseen levels, surpassing even what we saw during the Great Depression. So astounding is the increase in global inequality that the United Nations has declared it an international crisis and symbolically declared it one of the wonders of the modern world. Such inequality is anti-ethical to justice and indeed the principles of democracy. 7 out of 10 people now live in countries where inequality has increased over the past 30 years. You see, this income inequality isn't just in relation to the unemployed either, but is most easily understood in the context of the working poor. These are people, often skilled, working full-time jobs with reputable companies, but still living below the poverty line. One of the easiest places to observe this inequality has been in CEO pay. I'm a CEO. And many of us in this room are CEOs. Here, pay has absolutely exploded and increased by a factor of 10 over the past 50 years. This is while pay for other workers, all other workers, has remained flat, adjusted for inflation over the period. In one company, the most unequal in America, JCPenney, the retailer, the CEO, Ron Johnson, earned 1,800 times the average wage of his employees. And he sunk the business along the way, I might add. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman described the situation this way. It's all very well to talk in the abstract about the dignity of work, but to suggest that workers can have equal dignity despite huge inequality in pay is just plain old silly. In 2012, the top 40 hedge fund managers were paid a combined $16.7 billion, equivalent to the wages of 400,000 ordinary workers. Unfortunately, this is a growing trend, and nowhere is it more evident than in the developing economies of the BRICS countries, of which South Africa is one. South Africa, according to the Gini coefficient, is the second most unequal country on the planet, and is therefore at the epicenter of this crisis. In South Africa, extreme poverty and income inequality have produced unpredictable and sometimes scary consequences. The most obvious of these are the endemic strikes for higher wages in the public sector and in the mining sectors, as workers fight for higher wages. These have escalated in intensity and somewhat, I would say, inevitably led to the Marikana massacre. But much more concerning than this are the now daily, violent service delivery strikes that pit angry communities in open street battles against the police. My friends, South Africans are angry. Perhaps as angry as they have been in a generation. At the moment, their anger is untamed and oftentimes irrational, exploding in unexpected places against unexpected targets. Sometimes it's the government, sometimes it's the foreigners, sometimes it's business. But this anger is growing and is not going away. And the normalization of public rage has also had the effect of legitimizing violence as an effective methodology for fighting for change. It is these people who, under the right circumstances, are in a position to bring an Egypt-style revolution to our streets. It is these people, the 99%, who, no longer shackled by the fear of authority and no longer seduced by notions of the new South Africa, whom we should all fear. Julius Malema is no political philosopher. What Malema has done, though, is to correctly sense and then mirror to the public its very own sentiment. Therefore, when Malema talks about the redistribution of land, effectively what he's doing is mimicking what people on the street are already saying. We want our land back. He's effectively tapping into the vein of already angry, disaffected, militant black majority who believe that they have been cheated out of their rights and are reconsidering the compromises of the 1992 settlement. It is this powerful current of discontent that Malema has given voice to and introduced onto the agenda. And in South Africa, no single issue is more emotive or emblematic of the gross inequalities we have than that of land and property. Our shared history as black and white South Africans has essentially been shaped by the struggle for the right to the land and to control it. This evidently culminated in the repressive and draconian policies of the apartheid governments, and 20 years of democratic rule has done very little to reverse these policies. In South Africa, the land redistribution statistics are still quite frightening. 67% of land is owned by white farmers. 15% of land is owned by traditional African authorities, such as the Ingonyama Trust here in KZN. 10% of the land is owned by the state, and a lot of that is conservancies. And 8% of the land is in urban areas and privately owned. It's been in these areas where the black middle class has been able to acquire some degree of land ownership. But all in all, black South Africans only outright own 13% of the land in this country. And I certainly don't have to explain to experts such as yourselves the strategic value of property ownership in wealth creation. That those who own property are positioned to leverage it as security, allowing them to raise finance which can be invested in income-generating initiatives, which in turn creates wealth. And that this pattern can be repeated time and again, and has been the traditional mode for capital accumulation for generation upon generation. This is the virtuous circle that property ownership bestows. However, for those without access to property, it becomes infinitely more difficult. And that is the situation in which most black South Africans find themselves in. And it guarantees their status as second-class citizens, forever functionary workers, but never creators or accumulators of wealth. But this is not really a question of race, because that is not the case that I intend to make, but rather one of those on the inside versus those on the outside, of the haves and the have-nots. If the issue of land and property, contributing as it does to increasing income inequality, is not addressed in this country, then we should expect things to get a lot worse. And if we want to imagine how bad that could be, we don't have to work very hard. In Zimbabwe, we have seen that script already played out. And there is no reason to believe that South Africa is immune from that same fate. Things cannot carry on this way. It is unsustainable. It is unsustainable as the greater and greater concentration of wealth results in the uneven pooling of financial risk, which leads to greater economic instability and is evidenced in the more and more frequent and violent cycles of boom and bust. It is unsustainable socially, as economic exclusion leaves more and more young people on the streets, leading to all manner of socially dysfunctional behaviors. And most of all, it is unsustainable politically, when a critical mass of citizens eventually conclude that the only way to bring change is through public violence. When the other citizens refuse the share of winnings that we offer them, then we all lose. I always think that what it must have been like to have been a property developer in Damascus 3 years ago, the day before the Civil War broke out. Overnight, a lifetime of work and effort went up in smoke. That's a lot to chew on, I know. You know, when I come to events like this, I always work with the assumption that I'll never be invited back. And so I ask myself, what if I can only ever tell this group of people one thing? What do I need to tell them? This is what I need to tell you today. And I hope you'll bear with me. So, how are you and I to respond to this crisis? You may have walked in here this morning not even aware there was a crisis. But now that you know, what should you do? And perhaps more pertinently, what can you do in the face of such incredible challenges? Well, I like Justin's edict. Small changes lead to big things. Well, I will readily concede that the scope of the challenge is indeed immense, and that there is no single solution. However, I will put to you today that in social business, we have one of the most potentially effective and readily accessible antidotes to our inequality ailment. That social business offers a way out of the darkness and towards the light. That it does so by making an increasingly acceptable offer of the share of the winnings. And at the heart of social business is the promise of shared prosperity. And that, above all, is what we've been missing. I'm a great fan of the work of Malcolm Gladwell, whose singular triumph has been to make the findings of complicated scientific studies accessible to lay people like you and me. I recently read his latest work, David and Goliath, in which he makes the rather unlikely case that David was in fact not as weak as we have traditionally been taught. For sure, he was younger and smaller, but that these were not the decisive factors that they appeared to be. Rather, it was the fact that he had a sling while Goliath had a sword that mattered. And he explained this through purely technological terms. That a good slingshot beats a good swordsman every time. The slingshot never has to get near the swordsman, and yet can deliver his stone projectile with deadly force. I subscribe to this thesis, which says that the giant isn't always as threatening as he seems to be. And so it is, I think, with the change in paradigm that we will have to undergo if we are to avert the looming peril. One of the great benefits of living in a hyper-connected world is the ability for ideas to spread. That's how Facebook played a part in setting the Middle East on fire through the Arab Spring. It's also how the solutions to our current predicament can be tested and approved and improved to our collective benefit. This is how we know the rather extraordinary story of Muhammad Yunus and the Grameen Bank, which set up a blueprint for how social business could work in the real world of finance. Instead of seeing the poor as finance liabilities, Grameen Bank saw the economic potential in individual micro-business entrepreneurs and made a bet on them. Essentially, Grameen is a non-profit bank that lends small amounts of money to people who would otherwise not be able to raise finance from the commercial banks. It now employs more than 22,000 people. Now, while I myself am not a great fan of microfinance because of the exorbitant interest rates that it often charges, Grameen Bank showed on a massive scale that social business really could work. And that has given thousands of entrepreneurs around the world to have the boldness to test the boundaries of what is possible in this field, to apply social business thinking to virtually every industry imaginable. Therefore, what I'm sharing with you today is real. It's brick and mortar and rands and cents. So really, rather than saying that I am a businessman, my business card will tell you that I am a social entrepreneur. So what is a social business, you might ask? Well, there are a number of definitions. My one is it's a business with a core mandate to deliver to its owners and its staff and to the community in which it resides. Another definition puts it this way. A social business is created and designed to address a social problem. It is a non-loss, non-dividend company. It is financially self-sustainable, and profits realized by the business are reinvested in the business or in the community in which it works. That's a rather extreme, or that's one end of the scale of the definition of social business. Another definition leaves some leeway and says that a social business can be a profit-making enterprise only that it may choose to allocate part of those profits to other social stakeholders in the business, namely the staff and the community at large. So I hope that's helped to give you some framework within which to understand the concept of social business. I would propose to you today that the pillars of social business, and some of you may be hearing some of this for the very first time, are these three. They are joint enterprise, they are the common good, and they are obligation, not charity. The joint enterprise, we do a lot of work in the consulting space with industrial companies who are having strike problems in my consulting business. And we spend a lot of time engaging with the employees in those businesses, trying to bring them alongside the owners of those businesses, trying to show them that there is a joint interest in ensuring that the company stays open. Joint enterprise is the idea that both owners and workers have a collective stake in the success of the enterprise. The common good says that my business, working in this community, must serve the needs of this community. An obligation, not charity. The time for charity, my friends, has passed. The scope of the challenges that we are facing, I hope you now see, are so grand, are so grave, that they require a whole new paradigm of thinking. We need to see that we have a role to play in securing our own future. And the way that we do that is by understanding that we have obligations to the people around us. We have obligations to make sure that there aren't any more babies being abandoned on the side of the road because mothers are so desperate that they can't feed themselves or those children. We cannot continue to live in a society where that is acceptable. And so we have an obligation to engage, to do what you're doing here today, to give, to spend time, to find ways of improving the present moment. Now, some of you are sitting there and saying, well, don't my taxes and my BEE already cover all this? I'm being taxed at 28% or 34% or whatever percent you're being hit at. Isn't that enough? Isn't the government already taking enough of my money to help solve all these problems? Well, one of the things we do in my consulting business is that we're BEE specialists. We advise companies on how to optimize their BEE. And I can tell you definitively that 1% of net profit after tax or 2% of net profit after tax is not going to get this job done. The BEE legislative framework is useful, but it does not go nearly far enough. The level of inequality in our society is of such a degree that all of us are going to need to do more, to engage further, to give more. You know, I work with an incredible organization called Live Business or Live Village. Some of you may be familiar with Live. It does similar work to that being done by Justin with orphaned and vulnerable children. I sit on their board, and we have a vision to create a number of children's villages, each one with 2,000 children on it around the country. We have a wonderful team under the leadership of a visionary leader by the name of Tej Smith. And we are determined to put our hands to the work of making a difference and improving the present moment. Live currently has a couple hundred children on the village. And one of the things that we decided at Live, you know, we know that once we have 2,000 children on that village, we are going to need 2 million rand a month to keep the village running. And we know that there is no way that we can get charitable giving for the next 50 years to the value of 2 million rand for every village unless we change the paradigm. And so the way in which we've changed the paradigm at Live was by setting up Live Business, of which I'm a director. And Live Business, put simply, is a social business. It is a philanthropic private equity fund designed to raise capital, to invest it in businesses that will deliver a dividend and give it back to the orphaned and vulnerable children of this country. It's a business, but its sole mandate is the orphaned and vulnerable children of this country. And we are making strides daily in meeting that 2 million rand need that is fast approaching us. That's what social business looks like. In the context of one of my own businesses, at Catalyst Consulting, we decided with my partner that from day one we would give away 50% of the profits that come into that business to efforts to educate unemployed youths in South Africa. And so we set up the Catalyst Foundation, and that's what we do. We give money towards bursaries and scholarships and all other kinds of interventions to help uplift South Africans. And it is a core part of our business mandate. It's part of the reason why we're in business. So we do the things that every other business does. We wake up early, we go to work, we try not to get fired by our clients, and we try and deliver value. But we know that all the while we're doing that, we are serving the young, unemployed, and disaffected youth of this country. Those are two really simple examples of what a social business can look like, of what a social business can do. I want to tell you that it's possible. I want to tell you that I'm doing it, that we're doing it, that thousands of people in this country and in other countries are doing it, that they are finding a way to ensure shared prosperity. And I want to encourage you today to look at your own life, to look at your own enterprise, to look at your own activities, and ask yourself how you might be able to leverage this powerful vehicle that you have to do more, to serve a deeper social good. And like I say, the fact that you're here today tells me your heart is in the right place. The fact that you're here today tells me that your mind is already moving in this direction. What I'm hoping to offer you today is an idea, is a how, is an avenue, is a vehicle, is a methodology that could help us move towards becoming the kind of country we need to be whilst we still can. I want to implore you today to leave this place encouraged. Encouraged by the knowledge that as big as the challenge is, that we can find a way out of the darkness. And most importantly, that it's not the government that's necessarily going to do it, but that each one of us sitting in this room today has the ability to do something with what we have, in anticipation for what you're still going to do to improve the present moment. Thank you so much.